delighted to be here. It's the first time I've been to Brownsville, even though I've been to a few of the other border communities over the years. I never quite made it to Brownsville, so this is a great new experience for me. I'm really happy to be here, and hopefully we'll together go through some interesting information today, and then be open for questions, and we can talk a lot about how we might be able to help each other in bringing manufacturing back to America. Okay, this is me. I got introduced, but I'm unabashedly promoting my books also. I've written 5 books. I don't know how that happened. I started with one book about China, and then the rest of them just sort of popped out. The most recent book, and I think you all have a little card, is called Legal Blacksmith, and I do a lot of expert witness work. So I get involved in legal cases that are supply chain disputes. And one of the attorneys that I was working with, Sarah Rathke, she lives in Cleveland, and she and I were working on a case for about a year, an aerospace case, and she asked me if I'd write this book with her. So this is an interesting book if you're in supply chain or manufacturing. Every chapter is written in 2 parts. The first part of the chapter is about a supply chain topic like forecasting or planning or some aspect of manufacturing. And the back half is the legal aspects, what you need to know about contracts, what clauses you put in your contracts, and so forth. So might be a worthwhile reference book for you if you're interested. Okay, what else? I've been doing supply chain stuff for a long time, 25 or 30 years. I started out as a logistics manager, well, logistics associate, and then a logistics manager, mostly doing worldwide logistics, and then gradually moved into manufacturing and so forth. So I've been doing it for a very long time. I've been in the big consulting world about 20 years, helping all kinds of clients with their supply chain issues. So a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago now, I got together with some of the people who work for me, and we started talking about reshoring. It seemed to be a topic that was coming up a lot in literature, and we were seeing it referenced in different places, and decided to start the Reshoring Institute at the University of San Diego. Now, it's a nonprofit organization. We don't get any money from the university. I don't take a salary. But we have a dual mission. First of all, to help companies understand reshoring and to help them make the move to bring manufacturing back to America. And secondly, we take 3 graduate student interns from the MBA school and from the engineering school every semester, and they execute our research agenda. So we tell them we want to research a topic. Like this semester we're doing the solar panel industry and Industry 4.0, and our graduate students research it and they write about it. Everything is published on our website. There's no fee, or you don't have to sign up for anything. You can just go to our website and download any of the research. It's all free. So we have case studies and white papers and so forth. We publish a lot. There's a lot of content on our website, and you're free to go there and look at anything you want, download whatever you want. All right. So this is me, AJ. Anybody have junior scholastics or weekly readers in school when you were growing up? Do you remember those? So they were like a little open brochure, 4 pages, and I couldn't wait to get those things every week. I don't know, somehow they were really interesting to me. And sometime in the 1960s, there was one with a picture of Mao on the front, and it was during the Cultural Revolution. And I can't find that copy. I've tried over the years, but I can never find it. But it triggered something in me that started a fascination with China. And somehow or another, reading about China and learning about China was kind of on my agenda from the time I was about 8 years old. I have no idea why, but that's how it all happened. So, you know, people often ask me, how did a nice person like you get involved in manufacturing in China? And this is how it started. I was a brownie. My mother curled my hair that day. Isn't that special? So eventually, through my career, I did work in China and then started a consulting firm that was from about 10 years ago, no, 15 years ago, so that was very focused on helping companies outsource to China. And why? Because 42% of the world's goods come from China or pass through China or have some component from China. 42% of the world's goods. And so if you don't know China, you don't know supply chain. That's what I thought. So I was helping companies like crazy outsource to China. So during the early 2000s, most companies had an opportunity to look at either outsourcing to China or to Mexico. That was the other alternative. And there was a lot of outshoring done simply because it was the thing to do or because competitors were doing it. Not quite so much analytical capability. They weren't looking at necessarily the total cost of ownership. A lot of companies were just doing it because it was the thing to do. By God, I was helping them like crazy. This is a picture I took in a manufacturing plant in the 5th Ring Road outside of Beijing. So Beijing has ring roads, those first ring, second, third, fourth, fifth. And the 5th Ring Road is where there's a lot of manufacturing. It's about an hour, hour and a half from the center of Beijing. And this happened to be it's a state-owned machine shop. And it was one of the best. I was there working for a client in Beijing, and they were having parts machined at this machine shop. And it was one of their best. And so they said, "You want to go see it?" And I'm like, "Of course. I love going and seeing manufacturing sites." So we went on this little trek, and we get to the front door, and the general manager meets us at the front door. And he says he's got a conference call to get on, and he'll be back in about 10 minutes. But just go ahead and look around. You're free to walk around. Okay, anybody been in a machine shop before? You're free to walk around?
No.
So you can barely see kind of a faint little yellow line there, sort of, kind of, but nobody said anything. No hard hats, no toe protection, no goggles, no smog, nothing. We're just walking around. So about halfway down the aisle, you can see some people standing there. Those are my colleagues from my client, Beijing. And they're looking at things. So I started walking down the aisle. And you can see over here, here's a little guy operating a machine tool. No eye protection. He had those little black cloth Chinese shoes on. No, no gloves. And these are metal machining tools, right? And there's sparks flying, and we got a few machines into there, and I thought, too dangerous for me. And so I walked back out and went up to a mezzanine level and started taking pictures. Now, how many of you take pictures in manufacturing? Never, right? You're never allowed to do this. But they were fine with it, and I'm taking all these pictures. This is a huge machine shop. There were about another 5 rows or so beyond this one. And it was one of the best. This is the reason why it's so cheap to produce in China. There's regulations, but nobody follows them. There's no hard hats, there's no safety regulations, there's nothing, right? And that makes the cost to produce really inexpensive, very inexpensive. And it's also a state-owned enterprise, so they get money from the government and so forth. But I thought this was a great example of what you see and the reasons why it's less expensive to manufacture in these low-cost countries. Here's a little comparison of the cost. And if you see here, this is a comparison of a job that is the same in all 3 regions. So it's essentially a description of a job. In China, that job is a skilled laborer in the manufacturing areas. Total cost is $4.50 an hour. In America, it's $26.10, and in Europe, it's even higher, $33.25. This is pretty similar to the cost per hour that you would get for a job like this in Mexico as well. Okay? So how many of you heard, oh, wages are going up in China? It's getting more expensive to manufacture there, okay? Well, let me tell you, even if wages quadruple, still cheaper to manufacture in a low-cost country, right? So, if you're thinking about reshoring, that's probably not the argument you're going to base your decision on, right? Because it's still going to be cheaper. So that's not the answer. It's not labor. It's not labor going up, even though people say that very often. All right, so why is labor cheap? You saw the picture of the factory. That's what happened. So between 2001 and 2011, the U.S. lost 2.7 million jobs to offshoring, and this is what we left behind. And believe me, because I was helping these companies offshore, I saw this firsthand. This is what I was making happen. And it started to get to me a little bit, you know? So I'm watching big towns close down because the factory leaves, or unemployment rates skyrocket because we shipped all those jobs overseas, or better yet, brought the Chinese in, and the workers, they sat side by U.S. workers, and the U.S. workers had to teach the Chinese how to do their job. And then the factory was shut down in the U.S. Boy, that's hard to do. That's hard to do. Teach somebody else how to do your job, and then you're out of the job. So this is what we left behind. But the real catalyst for reshoring, you know, some of this I'm starting to feel and read about. The real catalyst for reshoring was the 2012 election, which wasn't as crazy as this recent election. But during the election, both Barack Obama and Mitt Romney were China bashing like crazy. I mean, they were saying our economy, the problems with the economy are all China's fault. China's stolen all of our jobs. China's manipulating its currency, and on and on and on. So meanwhile, I'm thinking, oh man, I can't tell anybody what I do for a living. This is awful. And it was, you know, I'm feeling bad about what I do for a living. But this was sort of the catalyst that got companies thinking about, should we reshore? And right after Obama was reelected, the 2008 State of the Union, or the 2012 State of the Union, they panned the audience, and they landed on Tim Cook. Who's Tim Cook? The CEO of Apple, right? And he said that he had talked and discussed the possibility of bringing manufacturing back for Apple products. Now, Apple doesn't make anything. They're a design and marketing company. They don't manufacture anything, zero, nada, nothing. They used to, but they don't do that anymore. So what happened was they agreed to work with their contract manufacturer, Foxconn, and since then they have reopened an assembly plant in Silicon Valley and also one in Texas outside of Dallas, north of Dallas. So there is this effort, and there's an interest, and there is talk that started kind of going forward about potentially bringing manufacturing back. But here's the real reason. These are my grandkids. Look at that one, isn't she cute? Here. My favorite. These are my grandkids. So here we have, you know, I'm feeling kind of sorrowful about closing down all these plants. Our president is saying we should bring stuff back. Everyone's bashing China. And then we had this family reunion. So I got three grandkids that live in West Virginia and 2 in the Bay Area. I live in Silicon Valley. Even though I run the institute in San Diego, I live in Silicon Valley. And so we had this family reunion, and we're taking pictures, and I'm looking at these kids thinking, holy cow. If I keep pushing everything offshore, I keep advocating for manufacturing any place but America, they're not going to have jobs in the future, right? I mean, we're middle-class people, and we need to focus on jobs in the future. So that was sort of the turning point for me when I had a little epiphany. So I got my people together, and that's when we started really focusing on reshoring and actively working with our clients to bring manufacturing back. You seen enough? Or should I hold it up there a little longer? Aren't they cute? So, you know, I got one that wants to be a baseball player and a ballerina, and this one wants to be a lawyer. My God, she wants to be a lawyer. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. All right. So why are companies actually reshoring now, or why are they considering it? There's a few things that are happening. The mood of America has significantly changed. You know, in the early 90s, it was all about finding the cheapest things that we could find, shopping at Walmart, looking for price savings, really buying consumer goods that were focused on being inexpensive. But the mood has really shifted. So Walmart in particular, and I'm going to talk about Walmart some more in a little bit, but Walmart in particular is famous for doing studies. And for a while they would do things like they would put out pairs of socks, for example. One set that was made in China at a certain price, and another set that was made in the USA that was much more expensive. And guess what people bought? The cheap stuff, right? So the perception was you wanted to go for value pricing. But what happened during, you know, this little period, like from 2010 to 2013, is people started looking for made in the USA labels. And as a result, there was a shift in consumer products, a shift in where things were purchased or where things were made and what the labels looked like on the products made in the USA. And so now we know that American consumers will pay between 12 and 15% more for a product if it has made in the USA label on it. Okay? So now we have evidence, and we know if we can get the price of a product down to within 15% or so of a foreign-made product, American consumers will buy it. And so will American industrial consumers. All right, so now I got a target. So now I can say, if I can figure out how to get the price to manufacture a product within that range, no more than 15% more expensive, I know we have a market here and we can sell it. So that's what we're working toward. All right. Maturing of supply chain strategies. It used to be, you know, when I started out in logistics right after undergrad, it was all about moving boxes. We move boxes all over the world. Now, these days, not about that so much anymore. I'm sure all of you know that are in manufacturing. It's all about moving information, right? You got to know, where is your inventory? Where is it in the manufacturing process? Do you have shortages? Do you have part shortages? Do you have, you know, issues with the weather? What kind of risks are there? It's all about the information these days. It wasn't like that when I started out. It was all about finished products and moving products and so forth. Now we have all this information, so there's really some, you know, some significant changes that have happened in information management. Introduction of new techniques, particularly robotics, 3D printing, 5-axis milling. These things create a more effective place to manufacture, a way of manufacturing at less money, more efficient, right? Incentives offered by government. So how many of you heard the story about Carrier staying in Indiana yesterday? It was just announced by the Trump administration. But if you go beyond the headline, what did they do? They gave them something like $60 million in tax benefits, right? So the government sort of bought them in order to stay in the U.S. So government incentives like that are available. We should look at them for sure and make sure that we're aware of it and we understand what's happening. Now, the reason why that's significant is it doesn't mean that Carrier figured out a way to manufacture in the U.S. because it was cheaper. They figured out a way to take advantage of tax incentives, right? So, you know, there's a way to go in terms of learning how to be more efficient and using automation. There's still some ways to go. All right, corporate economic patriotism. So now a lot of executives are saying, that's pretty interesting. Maybe we should think about manufacturing in the U.S. It's the right thing to do. Yeah, I have a question.
Sorry, what's IoT?
Oh, IoT, the Internet of Things. Okay? I'll explain that in a minute. Okay. So rise in Chinese labor, about 18% per year for the last 14 years or so. So although I showed you before, it's hard to make that case, labor rates are in fact going up. So I have a client in my consulting world, Brooks Running Shoes. But anybody seen Brooks Running Shoes before? They're high-end running shoes that are for serious runners. And they, like every other athletic shoemaker, manufactures in China. There are only 3 or 4 big shoe manufacturers in the world, Dean Shoes, Po Chen, a few others. That they pretty much make all of the athletic shoes. So once again, you've got companies that are brands, Nike and so forth. They create and they brand, but they don't manufacture. So almost all of this is contract manufacturing. So my client, Brooks Running, sent me to Vietnam and China in June to have a look at their manufacturing sites, do an evaluation of their manufacturing sites. And what I found was these contract manufacturers pay their workers in China $300 a month, plus a bonus, plus they live and they get food and housing and so forth. And they're highly productive, the quality is good and so forth in China. But in Vietnam, they pay the workers $200 a month, and they don't live on site. These are workers that come to work every day and they go home at night. So they're not migrant workers. So it's 30% at least or more cheaper to manufacture in Vietnam, right? So China, just like the rest of the world, is looking at the economics of the situation, and Brooks is looking at shifting as much as possible to the Vietnam factories because it's 30% cheaper, right? So it's all about the economics. All right, fluctuating oil prices. Boy, that's a big one, and a reason why companies might consider coming to Mexico versus staying in China. You know, it used to be we could get a container load of goods from Shanghai to Los Angeles for about $1,000, depending what the commodity was. These days, it's $2,000, right? So when you're looking at multiple containers over time, that's a significant economic difference. So again, looking at the economics. Quality issues in China, wherever we know about that, we've all heard that. Intellectual property protection, that's a big one for my clients in particular. I do a lot of electronics work as well, and intellectual property theft is a big deal. It's a big deal. Lower natural gas prices. So you may not know, but we have very low energy prices in the U.S., very low by comparison to the rest of the world. In China, there are regions where energy costs are 4 times what they are in the U.S., right? So here we are in the 90s working with these executives who haven't taken into consideration all these component parts of the total cost of ownership. So what happened in the 90s is people were offshoring because it was a popular thing to do. And all these executives like, let's get on a plane and go to Shanghai or Shenzhen or Hong Kong. And they get wined and dined, and so it was the thing to do, right? Everybody wanted to do it without really thoroughly looking at the economics of the situation. So that's what we're trying to help people do. All right, so Walmart, I mentioned before, has been an enormous catalyst for reshoring. Surprise you? Okay, in the 90s and early 2000s, about 84% or so of all goods sold in Walmart stores were foreign, mostly from China. In fact, they moved their sourcing and purchasing departments to Shenzhen, which is just outside of Hong Kong, because they had so much China business, right? All right, so what happened about the economics of Walmart? So they moved buying all these products, and, now they're sourcing everything in China. And what happens in the wake of that in America? They put a lot of companies out of business. I mean, just the enormity of Walmart, this enormous corporation. So behind, they're moving stuff to China, and what's happening, there are all kinds of plants and manufacturers shutting down in America because they're no longer suppliers to Walmart. All that has moved to China. So, who shops at Walmart? All those people that are now out of work. So Walmart had to shut down stores. They were gutting their customer base. And suddenly they woke up and said, aha, we're putting ourselves out of business, right? We're moving all this production to low-cost areas, but in the process, we're losing all our customers because they can't afford to shop anymore, right? So a couple years ago, they started the U.S. Manufacturing Initiative. And no matter what you think of Walmart, I gotta say, this is a fabulous initiative. They have pledged $250 billion to buy goods manufactured in America over a 10-year period. We're in the 4th year of this 10-year period. And what they've done is they've told their suppliers, make stuff in the U.S. and we'll buy it. In fact, this year, they do a summit once a year, and we always go to it. This year, they announced the first thing in the morning that anybody who pitched a product made in the U.S., they would buy it. Hands down, no qualifications. They're going to buy it this year and try it in their stores. Of course, if it doesn't do well, then they'll take it out. But they have pledged to do that in order to keep the momentum going. Now, the thing about Walmart is they're the mother of all supply chains, right? And even though you're buying consumer goods and so forth at Walmart, a lot of them are plastics, for example. Plastic extrusion and injection molding moved to China in the 90s. Pretty much there was nothing left in the U.S. You couldn't get a plastic product molded in the U.S. in any volume over a period of about 10 years. It was all offshore. But because Walmart has said they're buying products back in the U.S., guess what's happening? The industry is coming back. It's amazing. I mean, it's really amazing. Small motors is another thing that has come back. So you have little motors in hair dryers and in blenders and all kinds of consumer products. But small motors are also in a lot of industrial products for all kinds of different uses. So the production of small motors has also come back. Walmart is a champion, for sure. The other thing that they've done is they've told U.S. suppliers they will help guarantee bank loans for them. I mean, they have taken enormous steps to rebuild American manufacturing. Now, it's in their own interest, of course, because the more they put people back to work in America, the more they create Walmart customers, right? So they're bringing that back. Nonetheless, they have taken an amazing initiative. All right. The other piece to this, and so it's kind of a three-legged stool. We have customers looking for goods made in America. We have retailers and other producers making things in America, new industrial products being made in America. And the third leg is the government. So we really can't miss in 2014. Woo-hoo. And it was this, the Revitalize American Manufacturing Act, which supports about 45 institutes across America that are focused on advanced manufacturing. Now, why is this important? Advanced manufacturing includes all the new technologies, all the new skills that it takes to manufacture goods in the U.S. So it's really a government support for research and all kinds of different forms of support in order to push for American manufacturing. So now we got the third leg of the stool. We got consumers, we got industry, and we've got government. We're part, at the Institute, we're part of a coalition of European universities. There's about 20 of them that are also focused on reshoring into Europe, particularly in England, where they've really suffered high unemployment and all kinds of issues because they offshored so much of their production. And the problem that they have in England in particular, but across Europe, is the government doesn't get involved in the manufacturing sector. So they have consumers wanting to buy things made in England. They've got industry willing to do it, but they have no government support. So that three-legged stool keeps falling over. They have some problems. All right. So reshoring has begun. It's no longer just an idea. It's begun. 54% of manufacturers in America over $1 billion in revenue say they are either reshoring now, or they're considering it, or potentially it's there. And this study was done, happened to be done by Boston Consulting Group, but we just, at the Reshoring Institute, we just finished our own study. I haven't written up the results yet, but our own study that verifies this. We got the same kind of results. So companies are out there and they are starting to reshore, they're thinking about it, they're initiating projects. Here's a big one. Since 2003, offshoring is down by 70 to 80%. Reshoring is up by 1,500%. So it's not only bringing manufacturing back from overseas locations, it's also the development of new manufacturing. So because you're economic development people in Brownsville, it's the potential for bringing new industry here, developing new industry. I understand you have a SpaceX a new initiative going on here. That's the kind of thing where we're developing new manufacturing or new activity in various areas. So it's reshoring and new activities. As of 2015, offshoring is essentially balanced with onshoring or reshoring. Okay, so we've stemmed the bleeding. We're no longer shipping all these manufacturing jobs overseas. And American companies are also now considering nearshoring. So, this is what we would call bringing stuff back to Mexico, which is nearshoring versus China. So we're seeing a lot of that trend happening as well. And for good reason. Mexico still has a comparable labor rate if you have high content labor in what you're manufacturing. But logistically, because it's so close, the logistics costs are very significantly reduced and access to the market. Now, of course, right now, it's facilitated by NAFTA, and we don't know what's going to happen with NAFTA, right? So there's some uncertainty there, and there may be some issues because of that. All right, so rebuilding the middle class in America. Manufacturing is key to the growth. I think we've gone through this now. You understand what happened with Walmart. We see that we have to rebuild the middle class, and manufacturing is the cornerstone of being able to do that. Factory jobs are essential to our economic health, and this is the most important thing of all. If you don't remember anything else from this presentation, remember that every manufacturing job has a multiplier effect. So for every manufacturing job that we produce in America, and we start in America, it has a magnifier effect of 1.4 times. There is no other industry that's higher. It is the highest. So it should be our target when we're trying to rebuild the economy, is to look for those manufacturing jobs. They're really important. And why is that? Well, manufacturing in America pays a wage between $35,000, $40,000 a year and about $85,000, somewhere in that range. And that is squarely middle class. And what do middle class people do? They buy houses, they buy cars, they buy big screen TVs, and they send their kids to college, right? They develop the economy. So for every manufacturing job, there's other money spent, and it starts to have this magnifier effect on the economy. It is clearly what you want to go after if you're trying to rebuild the middle class. No question about it. And that's why our presidential candidates, all of our politicians, have jobs platforms. It's jobs, 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 right? And they should be manufacturing jobs, jobs, jobs. All right. But We're not going back to 1960s manufacturing. We're not going back to the dirty, dangerous, smelly factories. We're not going back to that kind of environment where nobody wanted to work, right? New manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, we're going through an evolution. Not going backward. We're not bringing all the jobs that went to China. We're not going to bring all those back. Because frankly, we don't want the 35-cent an hour t-shirt production back. Right? Why not? Because it doesn't pay a living wage. And if we bring back low-cost manufacturing jobs, then we create a welfare state. Because it is not enough to survive. That's not what we want coming back. We want advanced manufacturing, highly skilled labor, those manufacturing jobs that pay between $35,000 and $85,000 a year. And the technology looks different. See this guy here? His name is Baxter. He's a little robot that's manufactured by Rethink Robotics in Boston. And Baxter costs less than $20,000. Now, I've seen Baxter operate. You don't need an engineering degree to make him work. You just take his arm and you say, and you show him, pick up this and put it here. Pick up this and put it there. Check this size and put it there, right? $20K is all it costs. It eliminates labor from the workforce. Okay, so anybody that tells you all the jobs are coming back is wrong. They're not. What we have coming back is no silver bullet. What we have coming back are a selection of those jobs in advanced manufacturing, and those low-end jobs, that low production cost, the minimum wage or really low-paying wages, not coming back because that's going to be replaced by robots and cheap ones like Baxter. Okay, 3D printing. I think we all know the merits of 3D printing, right? We have a case study on our website, IRT Wheels, and they make hubs for racing cycles. Anybody a cyclist in here? So hubs are the centerpiece of a wheel. And for racers, the big international racers, those hubs are really important because they help the bicycle operate. And so this guy at IRT Wheels was a former racing cyclist and a vet, and he had some health problems. He had cancer, and so he couldn't race anymore. So he started this hub production facility because it was really key to what happens in cycling. And he was having his hubs made in Taiwan. So he'd design them, and then he'd he'd send the blueprints to this factory in Taiwan, and they'd make it, and they'd send him a prototype. And then he'd tweak it, and they'd send it back, and all this took like 6 or 7 weeks. And he got fed up one day, didn't tell his CFO, he just went down to the store and bought a 3D printer and started printing these hubs on site in Riverside, California, and saved $100,000 in the process, right? So, you know, printing on demand and the 3D printer being able to print your designs through software instead of all these back and forth shipments and so forth really was a big deal. So that case study is on our website. All right, the Internet of Things. So you asked about that before, or Industry 4.0, it's also called. So the Internet of Things is having everything connected. Are we connected today? Anybody have a cell phone? Guess what? It's connected to the Internet, right? You're getting Facebook and your email and everything. Well, that's the idea. The Internet of Things is connecting everything, which, you know, as consumers, we understand that. But in industry, if you connect machines together, what do you get? Well, those of you who work in manufacturing know one of the most difficult things to solve on a shop floor is sequencing one machine to another, because they all work at different speeds, right? And so they have different throughput, and so you end up, if they're not timed to have the same process and the same number of goods going through at a time, you end up getting big lumps of inventory in front of machines, and you get all these bottlenecks, and you know, it's a huge problem. So connecting the machines, whether it's through the internet or not, is one way of being able to sequence that so you can eliminate all of that latency in the production process. I have another client in Silicon Valley that makes router equipment that looks for traffic on the internet, essentially. So when there's a lot of traffic, there might be a some kind of break-in or something happening. And they have this equipment all over the world. And about 5 years ago or so, maybe longer, they developed this technology so the equipment phones home. So every night it phones home and it says, I'm operating fine, or it phones home and says, I'm failing. This isn't working right, this is a problem, or it's time for maintenance. And so they schedule their field service people all around the world based on the information that they get. So that's a connection over the internet. That's the Internet of Things, which is coming. So Industry 4.0 primarily is the Internet of Things, but it's also things like advanced technologies and so forth. It's the fourth industrial revolution. And if you wait another 2 weeks or so, we have a brand new white paper on the fourth industrial revolution that will be published on our website. We have a graduate student that's doing research on that this semester. Okay. Industrial robots, very important, very, very important. And as I said before, all the jobs are not coming back, but robots are going to take over the lower end of this production. Boston Consulting Group says that by 2025, robots doing welding will be about $2 an hour, which is cheaper than the cheapest low-cost labor market around the world, right? So now there's a CapEx expense to invest in this equipment originally that has to be added to the equation and so forth. But the operating cost is very, very low. And that's where we want to go. So now, remember all these, we have a welder shortage in the U.S., you probably know that. So we have a huge lack of skills in welding. And so we're training welders. But in the future, welders won't be actually doing the welding. They'll be managing the welding machine, right? So see the difference? The skills are coming up that curve. Advanced manufacturing is a different kind of manufacturing. The skills are going to be different. You need to learn how to operate computers. I mean, today, when you go through a manufacturing site, there are computers everywhere, right? Even if they're just doing testing, they're moving inventory along, people are using computers in manufacturing sites all over the place. And it's not just engineers, it's everybody. So guess what? If we're teaching people how to be manufacturers or have manufacturing jobs, the things that we teach them, the skills, has got to change as well. And that's got to come from somewhere. That's why the partnership with universities or technical schools, and particularly community colleges, is very important. Very, very important, because they're the ones that are going to take over this hybrid teaching between traditional manufacturing skills, welding and so forth, and advanced manufacturing skills. There are differences of opinion whether manufacturing will come back. Chinese or Mexican manufacturing labor earns about 15% of the U.S. China productivity is growing. China has this new initiative called Made in China 2025. It's a big deal. Xi Jinping, the president of China, started this initiative a couple of years ago, and their focus is on advanced manufacturing as well. So getting rid of all the low-end manufacturing in China, offshoring it to other countries like Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Myanmar, and focusing on advanced manufacturing or developing manufacturing in China. And I got to tell you, my 20 years dealing with the Chinese, they decide they're going to do something, and they just do it. It just gets done. They don't fight over it for 10 years. They just make it happen. Make it happen.
Yeah, that's the thing about communism.
Yeah, that's right. It's a communist government, right? Which I wouldn't advocate. I mean, I think we have the best government here. But even so, the competition is there. It's a threat. They're going to be on a level with the best manufacturing in the world in the US and Germany and Switzerland very shortly because they're focusing on this development. All right, energy costs. So, I talked before about energy costs being lower in the US. The thing is, only about 5% of American manufacturers say energy costs are significant in their manufacturing equations. Okay, so it's great that we have low energy costs. That's terrific. But doesn't mean much difference in the overall manufacturing economy. It's a pretty small line on your total cost of ownership model. Okay, one last thing. In the words of that great philosopher, Taylor Swift, shake it off. Haters gonna hate. Shake it off. I don't believe it. I think it's not real. I think reshoring is happening, and we have evidence to prove it. Yeah.
So the U.S. begins a movement from actually human labor to more robotics. Is China doing anything in that regard, and is there a race to get there?
Absolutely. And so he asked, if you couldn't hear it, he asked, what's China doing? Are they focused on automation also? That is the Made in China 2025 initiative. It's the focus on advanced manufacturing, the same thing. And in fact, more robots are purchased and sold to China than any other country in the world.
Yeah, Foxconn bought 60,000 robots last year.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So some reshoring success stories. So where's the gentleman from GE? Where are you? Oh, okay. So this is the GE story I was telling you about. Their Haier, which is a Chinese company, bought GE appliances a couple of years ago, or 2 years ago. But this is an important case study. So how many of you have big round white water heaters at home? In your garage or wherever? Okay, well, almost all of us do. And so do I. So here, my house in Silicon Valley right now is closed up and I'm on the road. But by God, that water heater's heating water just in case, just in case. It's kind of silly, isn't it? So what GE did was invent a heat-on-demand water heater. It's got a semiconductor in it that when you tell it you want a hot water heater, it's there, right? So it's pretty cool and a great innovation, and definitely, uses less energy, and it's just really a great breakthrough. And so the problem is, though, that those water heaters are about 3 times as expensive as our traditional big white water heaters. Okay, so the market for these expensive goods is the U.S. and Western Europe, right? I mean, you're not going to sell much of this in Bangladesh or Myanmar or Indonesia, right? So GE, under Jack Welch, pretty much shipped all of their production facilities for white goods, appliances, to China in the 90s and early 2000s. And they were producing all this stuff in China. And so now when Jeff Immelt came on board, his team convinced him that they ought to bring some manufacturing back to the U.S. So they innovated some products like the GeoSpring water heater, and they reopened Appliance Park, which is in Louisville, Kentucky, parts of it. They established a lean manufacturing line. They did a lot of improvements in automation and reopened this manufacturing plant, and eventually also brought high-end refrigerators, wine refrigerators, some other high-end appliances back to Appliance Park, and they have put 4,000 people back there. Holy cow. Now, they also got some labor concessions. There were some other aspects to it, but even so, it's a great success story, what they did. In order to do that, they had to really focus on advanced manufacturing, right? And an innovative product, and a local product. So a product they would sell in the U.S. So a lot of the lower end products the white water heaters, the low-end washers and dryers and stuff, are still made in China and now under the Haier brand. So if you go to like Home Depot or Lowe's to buy an appliance, Haier is a big brand there. You can see that. Samsung, LG, they all produce pretty much that brand. But the new big equipment, the high-end water heaters, those are US. 1888 towels. Here's a great story. These are big, fluffy, luxurious spa kind of towels. These big, giant bath sheets, and they're really high-end and very expensive. These are very expensive towels. So this company, 1888, had manufactured towels in the U.S. until the 90s, and then they shipped all their production to Turkey and to China, and were producing there. And they decided to bring back some manufacturing and label it made in the U.S. So they reopened a plant in Georgia and started manufacturing. They approached Walmart and they said, we have these towels, these luxury towels, that we want to sell at Walmart. Walmart's like, come on, our customers aren't going to buy this high-end expensive stuff. And they convinced Walmart it'd be a good experiment. So Walmart started stocking these towels in the Walmart stores, the big round made in the U.S. label on it. And guess what? They sold like hotcakes. Right. It was a huge success. Now 1888 towels are sold throughout Walmart, and they're still the high-end luxury towels. Apple Computer, we talked about them. They brought back assembly with Foxconn in Silicon Valley as well as in Texas. Starbucks. So Starbucks, they have these ceramic mugs that say Manhattan or Brownsville or Silicon Valley. Have you seen those? They have the name on them at Starbucks. They decided, a little experiment, that they would bring back the production of those ceramic mugs. And they reopened a plant in Ohio. And Ohio has an area that's known for ceramics production, and most of that was also shut down in the 90s and early 2000s. Most ceramics production went to China during that time. But they reopened a plant and started producing these mugs made in the USA, right? Very cool. And because, we're in this work, this was about 4 years ago, and I'm seeing these news stories pop up all the time. They have a Google alert for stories on reshoring. And man, Starbucks got so much press. I mean, day after day after day after day, there was something in the press about Starbucks and how they had reopened a ceramics plant and and ton of free publicity. Huge amount of free publicity. We estimate about $4 to $5 million in free publicity through articles written about them. Not advertising, but just articles. I mean, it was so good. Then somebody from USA Today asked the question, how many jobs does this represent? Any guess? 11. Right? Okay, so it didn't represent many jobs. And the mugs are still $10, right? But they got an enormous amount of free publicity. And that has to be one of the component parts when you're looking at total cost of ownership. I mean, publicity like that is very valuable to most companies, very valuable. All right. And a failure story. So it's not all good stuff. Sometimes it doesn't work. This is Otis Elevator, and they built a new plant in Florence, South Carolina. We're actually bringing back production from Mexico and wanted to start producing in South Carolina. And so they built this fabulous new plant. They re-engineered the production lines. They put in a lot of automation. And at the same time, they were installing SAP. Anybody have SAP in your plant? Okay, a few people. I worked for SAP for 5 years. So that's where all the gray hair that's covered by dye came from. I loved SAP. It's a great company. It's a great company, but very difficult software to operate. Very difficult. So they were installing SAP, built a new plant, threw the doors open, said, okay, workers, come sign up, and guess what? There weren't any skills in that area. So they had failed to evaluate the employee base, right? And so they struggled for a year. Half the production line was shut down. They just didn't have any workers. They couldn't find workers. They lost $60 million in 1 year just because they hadn't thought it through. Right? So, you know, we have a lot of red flags, and when we're working with clients on a reshoring project, we say, you know, we'd love to help you get up and running, but it's going to take you a year to build the skills and to make sure that you have enough employees and your supply base has come back. And, you know, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. And there are a lot of failure stories like this.
What was the training time period? You mentioned it, a year to train people. To train them to build elevators, what was the time frame? Do you have a sense of that?
And yeah, I think in this case, and I haven't talked to these guys, we just what we read, and there were a couple stories in the Wall Street Journal that were pretty bad. But no, welders and the machine tool operators, tool and die makers, we didn't have them in that area. Now, so what we do also is we'll start, if we're helping a company Reshore, we start at the very beginning to work with community colleges in the area. So we identify what the skills are. A lot of times the community colleges have, or area technical colleges have, labs already set up to train those kind of workers, or we develop a program to do that. So it's an early partnership that has to be there, and it usually takes a year or so, sometimes more, to get that done. All right, and eventually that's what they did. They worked with a community college to get some skills built. Man, they had these great manufacturing jobs available for $50,000 a year, and nobody to fill them. Nobody to fill them is really a pity. All right, so what does reshoring mean for Brownsville? So I try to understand a little bit about your economics. Jason was so kind to send me some information about Brownsville area. So, you know, I was trying to think through this. What does it mean for Brownsville, since you're on the border dealing with maquilas? You know, there's a kind of a different economic profile than you see in a lot of cities across the U.S. So short term, a lot of American businesses are also nearshoring. As I mentioned before, they're coming back from China, but they can't really make the economics work in the U.S. So they're going to locate in Mexico. And that means I think you're going to see some uptick in manufacturing being established along the border, and that should be a positive for you, because now there's a total cost of ownership analysis that's going into this decision to determine where in the world should you be manufacturing and why. And obviously the logistics costs are a big factor, as well as IP and the theft, you know, is another big one. And quality, I think there's probably a difference in quality between goods coming from China and goods coming from Mexico. Mexico having higher quality products. Okay, increasing border operations, import transactions. And I know there's probably a lot of importers here. I'm a licensed customs broker, so I deal with a lot of trade compliance issues going back and forth across the border. I have a number of Silicon Valley clients that have operations in Mexico, electronics operations. So there's likely to be an increase in import businesses and in development and growth and jobs in that sector. Border operations, transportation is another big one. I talked to an investment community in the transportation industry a couple of weeks ago. Was on a sort of a conference call with a bunch of investors, and we were talking about, you know, shifting production into Mexico and that effect on the transportation industry, because obviously you've got to transport goods, right, from the border operations, and it will generally have a positive effect on transportation. Longer term, however, so that's short term, that's going to happen. Longer term, however, it's really important to focus on advanced manufacturing. Now with, you know, we don't know what's going to happen with NAFTA, but if manufacturing starts coming back to the U.S., we need to think about how are we building skills and plants that are going to adapt to advanced manufacturing environments. All right, so longer term, you got to see that skill building. Remember, we're not just bringing back 1960s manufacturing. What's coming back, what needs to come back are advanced manufacturing and advanced skills those welders that used to weld, but now they control the robot that welds, or the 20 robots that weld, right? It's a different skill set, a higher level skill set, higher paid jobs, advanced manufacturing. All right, new government policies regarding trade. You know, we know probably there's some coming protectionist stuff that's going to drive some manufacturing gap, and new skills. We talked about that. All right. So there's more to consider than beyond just labor costs. So we started out talking about cheap labor in China, but you also have to think about innovation in products. How you automate those production lines to extract labor costs. How do you localize a product like the GE GeoSpring water heater? How do you localize that for the Western economy, for the U.S. economy? Skills and education, we've been talking about that. Tax and other incentives like carrier, for example. Supply-based considerations. You know, when we ship things to Mexico or to China, where do the suppliers go? They go there too, right? So it's funny. Some executives I've talked to are like, they get all excited and say, yeah, let's just reopen production line here in the U.S. And then they find out all their suppliers are in China, right? Yeah. So it takes, you know, a year or so to redevelop your supply base and to convince those suppliers to also come back home. Remember the Walmart, the mother of all supply chains? They're selling products, but now they have to bring all that plastics production back, small motors production back. Okay. So one of my favorite things to do is to go to Walgreens or CVS, and you know, they're notorious. There's lots of products all throughout that are made in some other country. And I like to go to the store manager with one of the products, and I always ask for the store manager and say, you know, I'd really like to have a product made in the USA. Now, the store manager doesn't have any control over that, obviously. But they're talking to the district manager, who's talking to corporate, who is talking to the buyers. And if enough people ask for products made in the USA, guess what? Those buyers are going to start looking for products made in the USA. Right? The same thing with Walmart. Because they have this initiative, buyers at Walmart are focused on trying to find suppliers who are manufacturing in the USA. So the more we push as individuals, the more that's going to happen. All right. Support STEM skills in elementary, high school, colleges, absolutely. And if any of you have children, me too, and you saw the cute picture of my grandkids. Should I go back there? That cute one with the curly hair? Really push science. Push, push, push. Even though it may feel a little uncomfortable, ask them about their science homework every day. What experiments are they doing? Create some excitement so they know you're interested and you can support that. And support that in your skills building science programs and math programs. Change the way you talk about manufacturing. You know, I was telling somebody before, when my kids were growing up, I have a son and a daughter, it never even occurred to me to talk to them about manufacturing, even though that's what I did for a living. And it was just, now when I think about it, it was just silly, right? So I'm talking to them about marketing, and my daughter's a social worker, and she was always talking about bleeding heart things, you know, how to fix the world. And I never thought about talking to them about manufacturing. Well, why not? Right? So now I've got a grandson who wants to be a baseball player, and I'm like, well, here's the thing. Why don't you study engineering in college, and then you can go to work at Louisville Slugger Plant, right? What a great idea. I mean, make those connections. Let them know that making things is exciting, right? It's the way to go. In Germany, for example, when kids are brought up, manufacturing is not a dirty word like it is, that's been in the U.S. Young people coming up in school are told, you know, how'd you like to work in the Mercedes plant, the BMW plant, right? How'd you like to work with robotics or make things? So create that kind of excitement and show them the way. you own stock in companies, tell them, if you own stock, you get voting things in the mail sometimes. I like to write on them, bring manufacturing back. Then they send it back in. I never know who to vote for because I don't know who the people are on the board. But I can make that statement. Right? I can say, bring manufacturing back to America, and send it back. Support and vote for politicians that have a strong and viable jobs platform. And we know in this election that Trump talked about jobs, 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 right? But there wasn't much underpinning there. So you need to ask your politicians and, hold a speech to the fire and say, how are you going to bring jobs back? Right? There needs to be a way, a plan, and a way to execute that. All right. And this is all the contact information. I think, we had handouts also, those white sheets that have our website on it. As I said, there's lots of content there. Feel free to go. You could sign up for our newsletter if you want to, but you don't have to. You can download everything just for free and whenever you want. Okay, questions? Yes?
So, well, first, thank you very much for your presentation and for being here today. Regarding your last slide about what you can do, I know the recommendations you made were more on a national scale, but it would be interesting to hear on a local scale, if this is something that the local community and government goes to, what are the kinds of questions and the kinds of initiatives that local community leaders should be doing within their community to say, okay, we talk about STEM, how do we work with our local educational institutions to push for a curriculum?
Okay, so did you guys do National Manufacturing Day this year? Okay, so this is a new initiative, nationwide initiative, on the first Friday in October. And a lot of economic development groups across the country support National Manufacturing Day. And it's I would start there, because it's a whole day where you do tours of manufacturing sites, right? And able to explain to students and to the general public what manufacturing is like, what it looks like today, the goodness of it. You get people from the plant excited about their jobs and showing others about it. So it's a really big nationwide initiative, which I think is really good for the environment. And what that helps do is connect you all to manufacturing, right, as well as students, your children, and so forth. So that's one big step that I think you can take locally. Okay. What else? Questions?
Well, one of the problems that I think we have in the U.S., if you take colleges and universities, I think we're high up here in education and skills. You go to the elementary and high school, and we're halfway compared to the rest of the world. But when we go to the vocational and technical schools, we're just way. We're not addressing that level that you're talking about.
Right.
So
Right.
what are other countries doing different? What have they done different? You take Singapore, you take South Korea, you take China. Will they grow at leaps and bounds? What is different? What do they do different that we don't do?
Yeah, so, there's no question in my mind we have the best university system in the world. I deal with a lot of Chinese engineers who, are pretty good operationally, but they don't have. I live in Silicon Valley, where the greatest engineering minds have come to develop new things. That's not what you see in the rest of the world, right? So, we develop these awesome engineers at the highest level there, which is great. I mean, they're the designers, they're developers, and so forth. But in order to execute that, you need another level, and that's what we were talking about in the trade schools. The old trade schools did some of that, but what I see, and I'm going to be honest with you, but what we see now is there are some communities that partner very effectively with community colleges. And the reason why that's important is community colleges are somewhat of a crossover. They're just not technical skills, or they're just not like manufacturing skills, like how to weld. They're also how to weld and how to use a computer. right? So the community colleges is filling in that blank across the country. A lot of the technical skills also have closed down. I mean, they've just shut down. And there wasn't a market for it. As we're gutting manufacturing in America in the 2000s, there were no students. So now it's time to be in an evolution where we're creating training levels that's beyond high school. It's skill, plus it's also advanced skills that are required for advanced manufacturing, for today's manufacturing environment. That's the level that we need to work hard with, and communities need to work with that. That make sense?
Yeah, but how do we get there? I mean, I think we know that that's where there's a weakness. You know, but if you take South Korea or China, they don't argue, they don't fight. They get to the point. We do. We fight. We argue. We spend. Time. I mean, we see it even inside of our companies. That happens.
Yeah.
Nobody's just going for the same old.
Yeah.
Nobody's
I think the best examples are probably, well, the best one is probably North Carolina, where Nikki Haley is the governor. I think it's North Carolina. South Carolina. I can never remember whether it's North or South. But they have done a very effective partnership with their community colleges. So they've attracted businesses, and the businesses, they then work as a liaison with the community colleges to say, these are skills that we're going to need, and how do we develop a program for it? There's some really great examples. There's another community college in Alabama. I can't think of the name off the top of my head right now, but they have done the same thing. They put together a machine shop inside the community colleges, and they're teaching students how to run the machines. Which, by the way, I mean, a machine tool these days isn't just mechanical, it's also electronic, right? So you need a different set of skills to operate that, and so they're teaching for that. But it's really, you know, an outreach program between the community colleges and the community to determine what the needs are and to address those needs. Okay?
All right. This presentation, while being very thorough, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
It really seems more like a PR move, because it makes no sense to reshore jobs, because competitively, we cannot compete against Asia. We look at labor costs and other type of costs. You made a very clear, informative there with the energy costs. It was only 5%.
Right.
And basically your business was in offshoring. Now, taking that into account, government intervention, should the U.S., or in your opinion, in your, what you've seen, and your take, should the U.S. take the approach in manufacturing using the Asian plants, like being more, for instance, subsidies here in the U.S., like what we did with the car industry, with the automotive industry when it was going to fold, and the U.S. really stepped in, and now the industry is back on top again. Now, in order to spur manufacturing, in your opinion, do you think the U.S. should be more, or the government should be more proactive?
Yeah, well, there are a number of issues there. So first of all, we're part of the National Association of Manufacturers, which is an enormous organization based in Washington, D.C. They do a lot of lobbying and so forth. And, you know, from that association, I know, as well as my clients, that there are a lot of government restrictions and regulations that could be eased, right, to make manufacturing easier and more effective here. So, you know, we have to be, it's, you know, a balance, right? So we have to be vigilant about protecting our environment and our citizens, but at the same time, not being onerous with a whole layer of regulations that aren't absolutely necessary, right? So the government has a responsibility to enact appropriate regulations that meet that balance. And this is not an easy thing to do. I mean, you really have to be smart about how you're doing that. So that's one thing. You had said, you know, competing with Asia. Guys, you got to get out of the mindset of we we're manufacturing like this, but in the future, we're going to manufacture something in a different kind of environment. Advanced manufacturing, more automation, local for local, right? So making products in the U.S. for the U.S. market, the GeoSpring water heater, for example, the luxury towels, right? These are products that can be made here, they're being sold here, so local for local. And in the future, what I see, the landscape of the world, is that there are going to be products made in each economy that are appropriate for that economy. Those big white water heaters, maybe someday we won't have those anymore, we'll have heat on demand, but they'll still be manufactured in China because that's the growth market. That makes sense? So you have a big global company like GE, and maybe they decide to make some products here that they'll sell here, and other products in other economies in Mexico or China or Indonesia that are going to be sold in those countries. So that's the kind of landscape that we're moving toward. It's not simply we ship stuff over to take advantage of low-cost labor and now we're going to bring it back. That's not the idea.
Where do you see trade in all of these equations?
Oh, I always get this question. So, in general, I'm for free trade. So I like the idea that we have NAFTA. And, got problems, right? It's sort of horrendous to do the import certificates and all that stuff. I know that. But in general, I think the flow of trade and facilitating that through trade treaties is the right direction to go. So it's what I would call directionally correct, right? To keep the world goods flowing all over the world. Once we shut down and become ethnocentric and close our borders and say, no, or we're going to put, 45% tariff rates, and we create all kinds of trade wars in the world. So, right before the Great Depression in the 1920s in the U.S., there was an act passed that was very protectionist. It shut down global trade, and the result was a significant contribution to the Great Depression because it put a lot of people out of work. We couldn't compete, right? We didn't have the facility for that. We were no longer importing. I mean, it just changes the world economics. Fast forward 100 years to today, I mean, we are a global economy. I mean, come on, guys. We can't extract ourselves from the world, right? It doesn't make sense to shut us down. So we have to think about this, and our government has to think about this realistically so that we put the proper tariffs and regulations and so forth in place to protect us, but not so that they're onerous and they throw us into some horrible global depression. Okay?
When the Valley first moved from agriculture to manufacturing and got involved in international trade,
Silicon Valley?
the original component was to have the major plants in Mexico right across that river over here and have the managers on this side. Do you see in your crystal ball going forward that in this movement that is happening now with Walmart at the head, do you see that we're going to be in the catbird seat for having more plants in Matamoros, Reynosa, Mexico, right on our border as nearshoring? Is that how you would phrase it, nearshoring?
Yeah, I think that's part of the evolution. So what I see happening is a lot of my clients, in fact, are moving production from Asia into Mexico. So that's like the first step. But then long term, if we can get the economics to work, we can get automation introduced, we can get some advanced manufacturing, then that would be pulled back to the U.S. So I think nearshoring is an interim step.
A decade long? How long would this step take?
A decade, yeah.
Generation?
No, I don't think so.
A decade.
At the rate the world is moving, holy cow,
Yeah.
I was telling my grandkids at Christmas time, we didn't have computers, right? Computers are, personal computers, maybe 30 years. Holy cow. Can you imagine? Can you imagine not having email or Facebook? I mean, they were a cell phone. I know. and it hasn't been that long. So the speed with which technology advances, and now because we're connected around the world, I don't, it's things moving very fast. 10 years probably.
Do you know what China's share of the labor market is worldwide?
Not off the top of my head. I don't know. Yeah, but their whole backbone of their economy is built on manufacturing. That's why when anything happens in the manufacturing sector in China, oh my God, they gasp. And we gasp. It's connected now, right? So when we stop buying from China, when we have a recession and we stop buying from China, China's manufacturing gets weak or soft or whatever, they stop shipping to the U.S., we stop sending our dollars there, their economy stumbles, they get sent into a recession, we're in a recession, and then pretty soon it's all over the world, right? I mean, this is not black and white, guys. This is complicated. We have an integrated world economy. We have an integrated world economy. So any step that we take has ramifications. Anybody played that game Whack-A-Mole? Where you hit the thing and something pops up and you try to get them all really fast so that they all stay down. That's what it's like. So you put a little pressure on one of those holes and something else pops up, right? It's constantly like that. I mean, this is very complicated stuff and needs to be taken seriously and, with a lot of education and effort and background and experience before any of these measures get taken. Yeah.
Are you familiar with Skills USA organization?
With what?
Skills USA organization?
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit hard of hearing. What USA?
Skills USA organization.
Name USA?
No,
No, Skills USA.
Skills USA. No.
No, it's a non-profit organization that they have in high schools and colleges. It's more popular in the high school level. I was part of it, and they do a lot of competitions for, from every type of career, whether it's mechanics, drafting, cosmetology, and all of that.
Interesting.
I was part of it in high school, but when I got close to graduating, counselors were like, well, forget about the skill part, you need to go to college. And that's, I guess my question is, how can we change that image of skills jobs that are no longer good? I mean, they push us to go to college, but most of these students are going for degrees that are not good.
And the reality is not everybody wants to go to college. Maybe it's not right for people. Yeah, that's a very good point. So, I hope nobody knows a high school counselor here. But I had the same problem in high school. So I wanted to go to Stanford in the worst way. I grew up in Phoenix, and man, I wanted to go to Stanford. I don't know, thought that would be awesome. My high school counselor said, oh, you don't want to go there. It'll be too competitive. People will be like you, and you won't make good grades, and you'll be competing every day and every day and every day. Don't go there. You can't go there. We're not going to support you for going there. I could kill her, because I wanted to go to Stanford. But so sometimes you get people like that who don't have the broader view, and that's why it's important for us as individuals, as parents, as grandparents, to make sure we're talking to our kids all the time saying, there are different pathways in the world. You don't have to go to college and be an engineer. I mean, if you want to learn how to make something, that's what rings your bell, or you like design, or, there are different pathways. So don't let people like that shut you down. Say, quote, the song, right? Haters gonna hate.
Are you going to partner up with any of these organizations? Like Skills USA is a really good organization who pushes kids to do skill jobs, but they don't get enough recognition for it.
I'll make a note of that. No, we're not partnering with them. We have been talking to one nonprofit in Ohio that's pretty big in Columbus, and they have kind of skills workshops at all levels, and they bring students in during the week to make stuff, and it's kind of cool. So there's some of that popping up. We try to partner with as many universities as we can. I mean, because in manufacturing, you're not going to just need welders and robot operators, but you also need managers. right? And you need executives, so it's, you know, across the board. So thank you for bringing that up.
I would imagine that the dilemma is, well, what are you educating the students for? You almost have to have, like you said, the opportunity, hey, we're going to train you for this job in this manufacturing setting. It almost has to be make to order.
Yeah, and there's no silver bullet either, no one answer. But one of the things, like we were talking about the National Manufacturing Day, the first Friday in October, is one way to get students an opportunity to see manufacturers, right? They may never get that opportunity, but you know, they get to go and tour a plant and they can see the robots and all that stuff. It creates some excitement. So, you know, it's sort of, it may be one person at a time we have to convince, but that's what we have to do.
I guess the lady that was asking at a local level, what can we do to spur interest and skills, is definitely start partnering manufacturing companies here, along with the skills education, and use internships to inspire
Yeah.
the younger people
Yes.
to work at the local level, you know, for free as the internship program.
Yes.
And manufacturing sites here, you know, you all gentlemen that are in the industry, and use labor.
Yes.
And benefit the education.
Yeah, internships are a big hole. And in many other countries, especially in Germany, which is, you know, manufacturing powerhouse, they do internships extensively. So yeah, there's a number of initiatives now underway to start that going in the U.S.
And there's some initiatives going on in Brownsville today, a lot of discussions. There's committees set up for advanced manufacturing already. Companies are talking together, educational institutions are talking together with them. We are working, trying to get more interns available for our students. There's also a program in the Valley called RGB Lead that does similar things that you're talking about, skills. They're actually having a big workforce conference at the island today and tomorrow. There's a whole focus that's talking about that. How do we get our kids into the STEMS program? How do we bring companies together with our institutions so that we're all working together as one? So I've not seen this energy or synergy happening that we've had before. Everyone is starting to come together, and I think everyone understands there's a need to come together, right? There's a lot of jobs in the local area in manufacturing that are not being filled because a lot of our kids don't understand those are good jobs and there's opportunities. And so there's a lot of work ahead of us. And so that's why it's important for us to bring Rosemary here, because we talk about it, but it's always good to have someone come in from the outside and validate what we're talking about. It's available for our students. There's also a program in the Valley called RGB Lead that does similar things that you're talking about, skills. They're actually having a big workforce conference at the island today and tomorrow. There's a whole focus that's talking about that. How do we get our kids into the STEMS program? How do we bring companies together with our institutions so that we're all working together as one? So I've not seen this energy or synergy happening that we've had before. Everyone is starting to come together. I think everyone understands there's a need to come together, right? There's a lot of jobs in the local area in manufacturing that are not being filled because a lot of our kids don't understand those are good jobs and there's opportunities. And so there's a lot of work ahead of us. And so that's why it's important for us to bring Rosemary here, because we talk about it, but it's always good to have someone come in from the outside and validate what we're talking about. She lives it, she breathes it every day. She's an expert in this. So it's very important for us to bring her here. I think it's very timely. And so I'd like to thank you for joining us, Rosemary. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning or this afternoon. I know it's been a long event, but to me it was very informative. And we can't just have one discussion. We need to have a lot of discussions. And so for those of you who are not BDC members, I ask you to join, to become a BDC member, all right? To help us develop more programs like this. What kind of programs would you like to see as a member? To have these kind of discussions and move these initiatives forward, all right? We're just a part of the total program here at Brownsville, all right? But we can be a strong voice. And so thank you all for joining us. Please Please, if you have comments, please let us know. We'll send out a survey and ask you your opinions on our program, what other kind of programs we can do. Rosemary will be around for a little bit. I'm sure if you have some individual questions,
If anybody wants one too.
please talk with her. But once again, thank you for joining us. And
This presentation in your web?
No, it's not on the web, but I sent it to Janie and.
yeah,
I
we have
can-
copies of it.
Yeah, you
We
can get a
send it
copy
out.
of it, yeah.
We have everyone emails,
Yes.
and so if you'd like, we can send these the presentations out. I'm sorry?
I can send you an email.
Yes.
Or you're free to just send it out if you have available.
Okay,
That's
great.
fine. A PDF file.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. Hi, my name is Jason Hiltz. I'm the President, CEO of the Brownsville Economic Development Council. We just finished a membership event today where we were discussing reshoring manufacturing to America, a very timely topic in today's environment. And we learned today that it's important for us to look at developing skill sets in advanced manufacturing to take advantage of those companies who are considering to bring back manufacturing to the United States from offshore locations. As Rosemary pointed out today, we're not talking about the 23-cent an hour job or the $2 an hour job. We're talking about jobs in advanced manufacturing. And those require certain skill sets that we as a community need to come together to develop and to work on so that we're competitive and that we can be attractive to companies looking to bring back their manufacturing. At the same time, there's opportunities for us with our friends in Matamoros to develop more reshoring initiatives there in the short term. As was pointed out, China and Mexico labor rates are very competitive. But when you bring the factor of Mexico being next door to the United States, there's significant cost savings in terms of logistics. And so today's event was to bring us together to learn about what's going on in the reshoring, in terms of reshoring, and working together as a community, as a region, to bring value-added, sustainable jobs back to Brownsville, to bring jobs to Matamoros, and to create a very sustainable, viable community.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Coates, the Executive Director of the Reshoring Institute, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization in collaboration with the University of San Diego. I'm in here talking to Brownsville Economic Development and the business community today about reshoring and the importance of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. By way of a little bit of history, in the early 2000s and the 1990s, about 2.7 million jobs were lost in the U.S. due to offshoring, primarily to China, but also to Mexico. And now it's important for us to consider how we bring manufacturing jobs back, because we have put a giant hole in the U.S. economy by taking middle-class manufacturing jobs away. Now it's time that we urgently need to bring manufacturing back. And the way to do that is to evaluate the economics of the situation, develop a total cost of ownership model, re-engineer products and innovate products, and automate our production. What we see coming back and what we want to have coming back is what we call advanced manufacturing. And that is manufacturing that includes a lot of automation, technology, and really is an evolution, a new kind of manufacturing in the U.S. We don't want the low-end manufacturing, the 23-cent an hour t-shirt production back. That will not pay a living wage and will not help us to rebuild the middle class. So what we want are these new kind of technological manufacturing jobs that pay a better wage and can help us. And that's going to require a completely different skill set. So what we're seeing is an evolution. This isn't simply jobs we offshored and now we're bringing them back. This is a brand new set of skills and jobs that we need to rebuild American manufacturing. And we know it's already happening. 54% of companies in the United States say that they are reshoring now or attempting or planning to reshore. A lot of companies also are going through an interim step of what we would call nearshoring. So actually moving production from places in Asia, China in particular, to Mexico as an interim step because the economics are appropriate. Labor rates are roughly equivalent in both markets, and yet the logistics costs and the proximity to North American markets is obviously much greater in Mexico. And so it makes sense to take that as an interim step before moving full production back to America. So we have some good news. We know that companies are starting to do it already, but it's not simple and will take a lot of thought and project management and a lot of component parts, moving parts of a project that are very important. If you're interested in learning more, we have a robust website with a lot of content that's all free and downloadable, and that website is www.reshoringinstitute.org.